welcome to another episode of Inner Peace, Better Health. I'm your host, Sayan, and today we will be exploring mental clarity, resilience, and personal transformation. Tonight, we are joined by Gerald Dobin, who is a coach and mindset expert. He helps professionals break free from burnout, anxiety, and performance blocks. Drawing on his journey through trauma and inner conflict, Gerald reveals how to uncover hidden patterns and restore clarity, energy, and purpose. So, if you've ever felt drained, stuck, or like you're running on empty despite giving your all, sit tight. This one's for you. So, welcome to the show, Gerald. It is an absolute honor to have you here with us.
Thank you, Sayan. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Perfect. So, Gerald, we see a lot of people, and it's quite common, among the working population, going through mental burnout. What underlying factors do you see that most people overlook?
Well, there's a bit of a misconception when it comes to burnout a lot of times, because often it's construed as something that's simply based on too much workload. It's just, too much work being put on you and that's it. But a lot of times it's actually more complicated than that. It has to do with your response, not just to the workload itself, but also to, the dynamics, the social dynamics in the workload. And most of all, expectations you put on yourself. And it tends to be an inner conflict. And what that looks like is basically if you imagine you're in a car and you have 1 foot on the gas and 1 foot on the brake, that's what it ends up being.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, that if you do that in a car, you're not gonna, you're gonna burn out the car, quite frankly, right? And that's what happens to your mental state, and it goes into the body as well. That's where you get that tightness in your chest, that anxiety, the all sorts of things can come from that, right? Irritability, frankly, even just feeling, like sadness. I tend to think some of depression tends to be that too.
Right. I love that analogy that you gave about the car, like putting your gas on, 1 foot and the brake on the other. So, Gerald, I want to ask you this. How can someone distinguish between temporary fatigue and, a deeper pattern that needs attention? How can somebody distinguish?
That's a really, really good question. Like, a very good sign to pay attention to is if it's happening in other areas of life as well. Because generally it's going to be based on a part of yourself that's playing by different rules than the, normal waking self is. And what I mean by that is that the parts of ourselves that play by these different rules are generally subconscious. So you're not necessarily aware of it, but you'll come aware of it in the feeling, right? In the feelings that you get, in the dips in energy, in the emotions that you feel. Sometimes it even happens in physical pains. Like if you have a physical pain that's just kind of chronic or only flares up in a certain situation, that's a sign as well. And it's the way to start seeing this is start seeing if there's patterns, if there's situations at work, situations in your personal life, tasks that you have to do, and you start getting some of these reactions. You can start tracking those and be like, oh, okay, this seems to be a pattern. And if it's happening for a long time, that's another telltale signal, right? If it just happened with a certain event and then it goes away, then you're fine, right? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about burnout, which tends to be chronic. So that's the way you just start spotting patterns in the way you feel and the way your body reacts to start seeing if this is something deeper underneath.
Right. That's refreshing. That's a great take on it, honestly. That really helps listeners understand that burnout isn't just about overworking. It's often a symptom, of deeper psychological and emotional pattern that, quietly shapes us within how we operate. And Yeah, I mean, when those patterns go unexamined, they can turn into, long-term cycles of exhaustion, or the chronic term that you mentioned about, which also makes me curious, uh, your own journey, right, through trauma and inner conflict, which must have given you a unique lens to see those patterns in others. So I want to ask you this, that how did that shape your approach to coaching others with, like, stubborn mental blocks?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important question because I think, especially for me, if I'm listening to somebody, I want to know where they actually came from. I'm like, all right, did you
Right.
read this in a book somewhere, or have you actually used this in your life? So that's a really
Right.
important question. And I think I was fortunate in some ways because the root causes of what I experienced were very obvious, right? It was right there. I mean, there's documentation on it, like there's literal government documentation on what was going on in my childhood, which is,
Mhm.
on one hand, you could look at it as, oh, that's awful. And in some ways it is. It is. But frankly, it also made it much easier to see what's going on. So what my start off with was in my early childhood. It was, I was born in Russia. It was very, very poor part. There's violence, drug addiction, alcoholism, all sorts of not so
Right.
great things, obviously.
Mm.
And I ended up learning, and that's another thing, trauma. That term is thrown around a lot. The way I tend to look at it, some of it is trauma is emotion stored in the body. So it ends up,
Right.
you end up stuck in the past. But a lot of times it's strategies that you learn from the past, and they're mislabeled as well as maladaptive strategies, but they're not. The strategies that you learn in the past are completely valid. They just don't apply anymore. They're not maladaptive at all. They're very intelligent most of the time. And so what I learned through that experience was basically that I had to be perfect. I had to not, be visible. I learned that it's very unsafe. So stakes were always high. In all my actions, the stakes were always sky high, like life and death sort of stakes. And luckily I wasn't in that environment too long, right? About 6 years or so. Um, so when I, got to the US, I was adopted into a wonderful family. All that changed. But the thing is that survival level programming was still there. It remained. And that's where the inner conflict came into play, because no matter what I did, one part of me was pushing on the gas, like we said before, and the other part of me was pushing on the brake, right? If I want to try something new and learn a new skill, for example, one part, the current part of me would be like, okay, let's do it. But from the past, it's like, oh, you have to be perfect. And that's survival
Mhm.
level. And here's the other thing too. The lessons that we learn, they are the magnitude of how much that inner part, how much it's going to speak into your current reality, as you can say, right? Through emotions, through your body.
Right.
It's measured on the magnitude of the
Right.
experience that shaped that lesson, right? So the magnitude of my experiences tend to be incredibly high, right? But the good thing about most people that I work with is the magnitude is less. And I'm not saying that you know, it's not trivial. It's still very important, but it tends to be less, so it's easier shifted, which is great. Um, but basically, I was left with chronically burning out in pretty much everything. So, because I'm just constantly fighting myself, and that's something that I had to first become conscious of, then learn how to work with. I did all sorts of stuff, everything from, regular therapies to psychedelics like ayahuasca, um, and everything in between to work with that. And everything that I learned from that 12 or 13-year journey is what I bring into my coaching now. Um, and it, when I was finally able to shift that, life became a lot easier, way lower stakes, just way more peace. Things don't take as much energy. It's a beautiful transformation, really, and that's why I'm passionate about this kind of work, because this is what I'm driven to help other people with.
Wow, Gerald, that's incredibly powerful. I mean, a lot of listeners listening to it right now would, resonate with that truth. That is, it emphasizes that resilience and clarity can be cultivated by anyone, regardless of their background or the past traumas that they went through. So, Gerald, according to you, how does or how do mental and emotional patterns interfere with the overall well-being of a person?
Well, it really depends. It really
Yes.
depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But
So that's the first part. And the second part also, which I think a lot of listeners would love to know, that, what are some exercises that you can tell right now that, will help break from those patterns effectively?
yeah, so I love both of those questions. So the way it interrupts and interferes with well-being, well, first of all, it can stop you, especially in the workplace. It can stop you from achieving the results that you want. And an example of that is a client I worked with. He was in the same job for 5 years. He's at one of the big tech companies, the FANG companies, right? And he felt stuck. He felt like he was just in this rut, and all coworkers passed by and all of that. And every time he interviewed for a new role, he wouldn't get it. As we started to examine the pattern, we saw that he just couldn't get in the flow with interviewing. He wasn't really fully present, right? Everything that he was doing is he was preparing everything. Like, he would type out the whole entire transcript and then try to memorize it and read it through. And
yeah,
the interesting thing is, when we started poking into why, and what we found was that there was a part of himself that was resisting the corporate jargon that he was expected to use in interviews. And this part felt like this was inauthentic to him, so it was pushing the brakes. And so he had to expend an enormous amount of energy to try to prepare for these interviews, to try to do them, and he ended up sounding like a robot, right? And
right.
so when we went through and we actually aligned that part of himself that felt inauthentic, the difference was night and day. Like, it was insane. It was all of a sudden, after 50 minutes, he was able to just crush the interview. Like, he was so fluid. He killed it. And I got a recording of him before and after. I was like, you need to listen to this, because this is insane, right? And he did, and he was just shocked. And so that's an example of micro-burnout. So you're trying to do something when you're not aligned with it. And so that's one major outcome is that you're not only are you not doing it very effectively, but you're also suffering while you're doing it. And
right.
When it comes to your second question of what exercises you can do, the first thing is to start becoming very conscious of what's really going on under the surface and when it's happening. So you start just noticing, and this can be useful to journal. Start journaling of like, okay, what's going on? What am I feeling? Which part of the body? Start seeing the patterns there. And just becoming aware of it can bring some answers there. Then the second part, and this is what I tend to focus on, is to start connecting with those parts of yourselves that are resisting, that are in resistance, and recognizing that these parts are actually they're not trying to make you miserable, right? They're trying to do their job, and they're trying to help you. So they're actually very loyal to you. And when I talk about parts of yourself, I think a lot of times people think that only people with, like, what's it, DID, what's that, what does that stand for again? I'm blanking on it. Like, dissociative identity disorder, isn't that what that is? Right?
Okay. No,
Like,
I don't have a clue on
okay.
that.
That's okay. That's okay. Like, when people think there's different parts, they think that it's, oh, like, are you hearing voices? And it's nothing like that. It's just every one of us have these subconscious parts in ourselves, and we're not aware of them. Like, we feel just like one whole person, right? You're not walking around. I don't think you're walking around being like, oh, okay, like, what are these other parts that they want? You're not. You're just like, I'm just me. But we all have them. We literally, all of us have them, and they're subconscious. So the way we start connecting with them is visualization. And visualization is huge, right? It's used by all the top people, right? From CEOs to like Tony Robbins, Michael Phelps, even Oprah talks about it. Everybody talks about it because it's so incredibly powerful with connecting with the subconscious mind. And so we start using visualization, connecting with these parts, getting curious of what they're doing, thanking them for what they're doing, and then working with them to see if they'll accept a new job, to see if they can see what reality is today, and if they can take on a new role to be more effective in actually supporting this. And once they are, once they take on that new job, everything starts to shift. So that's how you start working with these parts.
Right. That makes me realize that being self-conscious, self-aware, identifying patterns within you is the first step to the holistic well-being of a person.
It's widely overlooked.
Yeah, definitely. Like I love the example that you gave just a couple of minutes back of your colleague, that was which was regarding the micro-burnout, so to say. And yeah, I've seen this so many times in my day-to-day lives, that so many professionals, they struggle with anxiety and decision fatigue, right? They're not able to focus on the agenda of the meeting, and it goes on. So, Gerald, how do you think?
That's another. Oh, sorry,
Right.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah,
Okay.
decision fatigue. That's another huge one, right? You don't know what choice to make. There's different parts of you fighting inside. Another huge one.
Right.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how can because I've seen these people struggle with like how to kick off the meeting. What's the right tone to set at the start of the meeting, and many people in corporate that I've worked with fail there, and that is like the first step. So I want to ask you this: how do you think clarity and focus be restored in high pressure environments? Especially this is on behalf of all the corporate people out there who are listening to this right now. So if you can please share that.
Yeah. Well, it's so again, I mean, it's all very case by case basis, but the general way of going about it is going to be to see what part of you is most affected by that pressure, and what belief does this part of you hold, and also where does this belief come from. So that part that's affected by pressure, what's it fearing? And then you start working with that and start basically giving it, you start to reprogram it. You give it a new belief. And there's exercises, there's different ways of doing that. And this is where it becomes helpful to work with, a coach or someone who has done this before. But as these different parts can take on different beliefs. Like, for example, if you're in a high pressure meeting and, this part of you is just freaking out because it thinks they tend to catastrophize, right? Different parts of ourselves tend to go to the worst case scenario. Like, okay, if I don't do this, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to become homeless. Right. I'm going to be living under a bridge. And it sounds kind of funny, but we're survival wired creatures, right? We used to live in caves. Right. This is the way the saber-toothed tiger used to be out there. It's not anymore. but that's how it used to be. So that's how we're still wired deep inside. And so when we start working with these parts and making the worst case scenario more realistic, right? If you bomb the meeting, you're most likely not going to get fired, right? Like, and you're not going to be living under a bridge. You're going to, even if you did get fired, you get a new job, right? You'd be okay. Right. We make the stakes lower. So the basic formula is to see what part is getting triggered, and triggered means it's, the outside circumstances are in such a way where this part is being activated. It's throwing up emotions, red flags, putting on the brakes, all this stuff. We start seeing what rules this part is operating under, and then start shifting those rules. And oh, by the way, too, the visualization on my website, there's a guide for visualizations. So any listeners listening, you can actually go there and download it right now. So we're going to throw that in there. But yeah, that's the basic process, and it's highly effective.
That's I love that. I love how you frame that. And yeah, I mean, Gerald, you shared a couple of very powerful tips, on how to visualize beyond the high stakes that you mentioned, right? That we are not living in caves anymore. We got to see beyond that. So, Gerald, before we wrap this up, for all the listeners listening right now, what's the best way to reach out to you? And for everyone who's listening, do not worry. I'll include the links in the show notes so you can check them out anytime you want.
Perfect. I appreciate you putting in the show notes, because my website's geralddobin.com, but when I chose that URL, I didn't realize that my name, the spelling of my name, isn't obvious to the most casual observer. So
no worries, you can you can go on and spell out the individual consonants. That is also fine.
Yeah. So it'll be to go to my website. You can shoot me an email, even if you just have a question or just want to say hi. I'd love to hear from you. And just shoot me an email, or even you can book a short 15-minute call with me as well. It's completely free. And I'd be excited to hear from you, from any of the listeners.
Perfect. So, dear listeners, with that, we come to the end of today's episode with Gerald Dobin, where he reminds us that burnout and mental blocks are signals, not failures. They are invitations to pause and realign. So, I want you to take a moment today to reflect, notice your patterns, and practice one small act of clarity. Over time, those small steps rebuild your resilience and energy in ways that truly matter. This is Sayan, and you're listening to Inner Peace, Better Health, where we explore the mind, the mess, and the magic of becoming whole again.